Hey folks, today I want to revisit the Glock Performance Trigger. Initially, my impression of it was very positive. I've got a product that my understanding was, hey, this thing's super reliable, super good. Glock factory part, put it in the gun, no worries. And it's like a performance trigger, but still a Glock factory part. Maybe it's not the most performance-y trigger, but I mean, in my view, that's not really that bad. It just seemed to me like just an upgrade for the Glocks. Now, once I actually got one, I think something changed from the tester models, where I think the coating was different. It turns out the gun requires lube. I think every 1,000 to 1,500 is what the factory is recommending at this point. And I put out a video saying, hey man, this is a serious problem, essentially. And a lot of the comments, a lot of the response to that was along the lines of like, hey, what are you too lazy to lube your gun? It was just like, hey, it's every 1,000 rounds or whatever, you drip some oil in there. This isn't a big deal. Whatever. You can imagine. Some people weren't even that nice. And I think that really highlights a difference in mentality and a difference in use case. Whereas me and like my perceptions of equipment is geared towards regular serious training with that equipment. And I think a lot of people, most people that own guns, they don't shoot them that much, like, let's be honest. So to give you a good example of this, I had a guy in a 4-day class segment. It was actually two different 2-day classes. He was in both. And this was like a very squared away individual. Like, his equipment was squared away. He was squared away. He could take direction on board and implement changes right away. There was just all the indications I had is that this is a smart guy that I would want to pay attention to what he thinks. He was shooting a Glock 34 and had the performance trigger put in there. And what he reported was kind of what I thought, where it's like, yep, I got to break the gun apart every night, and I'm actually greasing the trigger. I'm not oiling it. And that means it kind of lasts for the day. If I don't do that every training day that we're doing here, the trigger starts getting a little bit sticky. I was thinking like, yep, that's my experience. So that's what it turned into after I shot the guns a little bit. Now, if you don't train all that much and you hear like, hey, every so many rounds you put some oil in there, that doesn't sound like much. But here's what you got to understand. The normal training with a Glock is I pick it up and I train with it, and then I put it away, and that's it. Being honest, I've shot the guns tens of thousands of rounds without doing care for them. And it'll get to the point where, like, let's say you're working in sand, and you're dumping mags in the sand after training or during training, and they're getting sand in the mags. Like, you'll get to the point where it's like you got to blow the sand out of the mags with a compressed air gun or something like that, or the mags will stop working. Or the gun gets so much carbon in it, the slide stops wanting to go forward as much, and then you got to clean it. That takes a long time. In a practical sense, you pick up the gun and you train with it. You don't really have to do anything or think about anything. If you have a trigger, or any component really, but really if you have the trigger where, hey, I have to lube this thing every 1,000 rounds, that means every single time that I pick the gun up to train with it, just because, hey, if I go shoot 500 rounds a day to train and then put the gun away and I don't lube it, like maybe that happened or whatever. Like let's say I shoot 500 rounds a day for practice. And every time I pick the Glock up to train with it, I have to think about that trigger. Like, ooh, is it gritty? Should I grease it? Should I grease it after practice? Like, what do I got to do? It becomes this thing that requires constant attention if you're actually training with it. So yeah, that's not the experience I want when I'm shooting a Glock. Like, I just don't want that. Here's a good example, like the CZs, the CZ Shadow 2s. Those are great guns. I like shooting those, but the fact is they're going to build up carbon behind the extractor, and eventually you got to pull the extractor off and clean it and put it back on there. That'll be the most common cause of malfunctions. How often does that happen? You need probably you got to clean out. You'd clean your extractor before every major match that you cared about. maybe every 5,000 rounds, whenever the gun starts jamming from the extractor being dirty, usually in my experience, like about 5,000 rounds they make it. Like that to me, that's kind of annoying. But if I have a gun for competition, I'm kind of accepting some limitations. But as far as the Glocks, like no, I want a trouble-free training experience. And I think what people should understand if they're looking at training really seriously is like, you don't want to add in variables like that. Like, here's this thing, this trigger. Now I just have to pay constant attention to this thing. Like that to me is a big step down with the Glock. So if that sounds, I get it. If your attitude's like, hey, if you're just too lazy to lube it every 1,000 rounds, like you're a dummy, or that's not the trigger for you. I totally get that point of view. However, just understand, like I'm coming at it from like, I'm going to be shooting this thing all day long type of perspective. So that's different than a lot of people's.